My name is Patty Vansel. I'm going to be hosting you tonight. Abby Oswald is behind the scenes at RJ's, making sure that your questions get heard and taking care of all the technical issues that come with Zoom. I want to welcome you all to RJ's virtual, the new normal, I hate to say it, event here. Tonight we are lucky to have two amazing authors, Dani Shapiro and our star of the night, Kerri Arsenault, with her debut book, Milltown, Reckoning with What Remains. They are going to be in conversation, but before we get to our authors, I want to just make sure everyone can hear me. Can everyone give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Good. I want everyone to know that they're going to be muted throughout the event. You are encouraged, and we would love you to ask questions, but you can ask them through the chat box on the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get to as many as we can. We encourage you to buy the book. We'll want you to know that while supplies last, Kerri's gonna come in and we're gonna have a bunch of signed books, but they go fast, and we can guarantee that you're gonna get one. So don't wait till you order the book. And thank you, Kerri, for signing. That means a lot to us. Yeah. Just another little Zoom housekeeping note. If you wanna look at the whole gang, you can through Galley View. If you wanna just look at Dani and Kerri in conversation, you can go to Speaker View. I find that most helpful. And I think that's all for now. I'm going to get right into introducing our authors. Again, the name of the book tonight is The Milltown, Reckoning with What Remains by Kerri Arsenault. Kerri is the book editor at Orion Magazine and is contributing editor to the Literary Hub. She's also a mentor for PEN America's Prison and Justice Writing Program, and she's written for a bunch of publications. But what I love at RJ's is to introduce a debut author. This is her first book. It's hard to believe it's your first book because it is so riveting. The press she's gotten for this book, I could go on and on. Jonathan Franzen, Richard Russo. I love this review for your book, Kerri. It says, mixing memoir and reporting, Arsenault chronicles her return to her hometown of Mexico, Maine after her grandfather's death. There she unearths the decades-spanning environmental abuses and toxic effects of the mill's area's money-making beacon, the paper mill. I mean, I didn't read a bad review, so there's that. We also have another rock star. We have Dani Shapiro here, who is a great friend to RJ's. And to our owner, Roxanne. Dani Shapiro is probably best known for her instant New York Times bestseller memoir, Inheritance. She's written several memoirs and 5 novels. She currently launched a really fantastic podcast called Family Secrets, so I urge you to tune in. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dani and Kerri, and enjoy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patty. It's so great to be with you all. I mean, one of the things we were talking about just before we began is that it's so amazing that during these times we can gather from far and wide, from all over the world. And ironically, I suppose, Kerri and I live about 10 minutes from each other. So we can't be together, none of us can be together, but we can gather in this amazing space and talk about Kerri's really eviscerating, beautiful Milltown. So we're going to begin with Kerri reading for a few minutes and talking about the book a little bit, and then we'll launch into conversation, and then we'll take your questions, which we're looking forward to. So think about what you might want to ask while we're talking. Kerri.
Thank you, Dani. Thank you, Patty. I'm very sad not to be with Dani in person, but at least I get to see her finally after all summer of not. I'm going to start with chapter 1, just right from the beginning. It's to introduce you to the landscape of my town. Starts, what goes around comes around. From the porch steps of the house where I grew up, you'll see the end of the road. There, the pavement dips down to reveal the town's only traffic light, a gas station, and the roof of the Family Dollar store. Behind the store lies the Androscoggin River, and just beyond the river, the paper mill's largest smokestack emerges like a giant concrete finger. From anywhere in town, you can orient yourself to this stack, or by the ever-present ka-chink, ka-chink, ka-chink of the mill's conveyor belts, and find your way home even from a pitch-black walk in the woods. When mill shutdowns occur for holidays or layoffs, the smokeless stacks resemble the diseased birch trees dying throughout New England. To the right of the porch, you'll see a street of clapboard homes, silent but for the occasional snarl of a jake brake on a logging truck or a motorcycle shifting gears. A mile or two out of town, the road narrows, and small creeks knit through pastures, shadowed by hills, a working farm or two, a long straight road, and cut hay, muddy cow paths, rotting leaves or black ice, depending on the time of the year. The seasons, they calendared our lives. Farther up the road, you'll eventually bump into the North Maine woods. If you look at a map, you'll get an idea of the yawning jurisdiction of the area, which lies generally within the twisted pavement of Route 2, Interstate 95, and the Canadian border, their lines lassoing the wilderness within. The woods are a deluge of spruce, fir, hemlock, and beech, a steady brown and green canopy fractured by silvery brooks or iron-gray lakes. The damp, mossy understory and thick brush, claustrophobic with tangled twigs and scant cabins, hide the chewed-up dirt logging roads that colonize the back country. I didn't pay much attention to those darker, deeper woods because there were already so many trees right in my backyard. My mother stayed home while my father worked, her making pot roast, him making smokestack money. As kids, we explored the world through textbooks and made classroom dioramas of what we thought a Mayan village or a Midwestern dairy farm looked like. The rest of the world seemed to be in New Hampshire or Canada. Families didn't go on overseas vacations, and rarely interstate. Our lives were focused inward: Red Sox games, union strikes, and grousing about the weather. Monumental ideas were surfacing across America: feminism, environmentalism. However, there were no movements in my town but for people walking across the mill's footbridge to work. We were more likely to dry bras on a clothesline than burn them. We lived in a shrinky-dink world where everything was there, just smaller. We were lucky in this, felt safe with our doors unlocked at night, and ameliorated most of our sins within the latched doors of St. Teresa's confessional. At nighttime football games, we watched our fire-twirling majorettes toss their batons skyward in a spinning, blazing fan. We caught them dead center every time. Those kerosene-soaked batons in the dusk of autumn, they smelled like permanence. Overall, what we needed, we had. Everyone knew everyone, and we liked it that way, for what other way was there? It was quite the place, my mother always says. There was never any reason to leave. And our nuclear family of 7, we always had enough food, plenty of hand-me-downs, some spanking, and an unspoken love for each other, because frankly, nobody really spoke much about love at all. In the drowsy dusk of summertime, when the sun dipped under the foothills and the humidity of the day invaded kitchens and bedrooms, people flocked to their porches. There they chatted while night knit itself into a tight blanket. As the sun sank one by one, mimicking fireflies, house lights flicked on and porch lights flicked off, and people streamed inside for the evening. The sound of clinking dishes, faint music, vehicles purring, and light as vapor laughter scented the air. Night fell like a bruise. Things stayed in this balance, with minor adjustments every now and then, until America's working-class towns started to ebb alongside the industries that nourished them. The future? We knew nothing of it. Our horizon trembled like a fragile convex meniscus, brimming away from the landscape that held it. All of what was before us was not as bright as what had passed.
Thanks, Kerri. God, it was good to hear you read. And it makes me think about so many things. One is that really deft way at the end of that passage that you're letting us know that there's an adult who's come back, who has a wider perspective and is, you're flashing forward essentially to the narrator who's telling the story. And, again and again, I was struck in reading your book at the way that there are these different Kerris that are interrogating this landscape. There's the child Kerri, there's the teenage Kerri, there's the young woman Kerri coming back from travels, and then there's the sort of midlife Kerri, if you will, coming back at various times over the course of the writing of this book. So I guess what I want to ask you is, your book is so much about landscape and what it means to revisit it. Do you think of Milltown, which manages to not have the word or signifier memoir on the cover, which is, by the way, in the world of publishing, a feat unto itself?
I know.
Right? I mean, did you have many fights about this?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I've lost all of them. And you won your very first one, so bravo. But so it's investigative journalism, it's elegy, it's memoir, but how did you think of it as in all of the years that you were working on this book?
It's funny. I thought of it in all those ways, and I could never get it down to one path, because I don't know if I told you this, but the structure of the book really is the structure of our river, which is actually this line that goes through the book. That's the actual river. But I thought of it like a river too. As I accumulated information and was doing my research, I was like, I'm moving through this body of water or body of work, and it was just going all sorts of different directions and tributaries. And I didn't want to ignore those places either. And I didn't want to ignore that voice of the journalist Kerri or the elegiac Kerri. So I just went with it. And I was like, I'm going to go down these paths. I don't know where it's going to go. And sometimes it ends up in a dead end. Well, often perhaps, but I'm going to just go there and follow this river. And it sounds like really kind of, octopusy, but it was really, a river also moves forward in time nonetheless. So I kept moving forward. And at the same time that I was moving forward and doing all these footpaths, I guess I was also doing this recursive motion, like you mentioned, like going home and coming back and going home and coming back, and like so that was also moving forward too. So yes, we did have arguments about what this book was, and I thought of it in all those ways, and I couldn't not. And we even argued about the genres. Is it environmental? Is it about the working class of America? Is it about, economic down to, what is it about? So, and there was a professor of geography actually in the UK that came up with a great term, and everybody said, no way, you're not using it. And we didn't, but it's on my website. It's called an autoethnography. I'm reading the definition right here, which I love. He's like, wow, you wrote this autoethnographic memoir. And I'm like, what is that? So I Googled it immediately. But it says a form of qualitative research in which an author uses self-reflection and writing to explore anecdotal and personal experience and connect the autobiographical story to wider cultural, political, and social meanings and understandings. That's what I wrote.
Yes.
But I can't, but it's a real mouthful, right?
No. I mean, I can absolutely imagine the marketing people at your publisher. Yeah, no. But that's exactly what you've done. It's too much to kind of take in our quick, like what is this kind of culture? But, it struck me, I was rereading the book today, and one of the things that I noticed, and I don't know whether this began intentionally or whether it became intentional for you, but like structurally, you do what I think of as you show the seams of the writing of the book itself.
Yeah.
So, which I always love when I'm reading either nonfiction or autofiction or any kind of work where that is possible, or even poems where you see the making of it, and the writer struggling or thinking about the making of it. And there's this moment. I have your book right here. It's page 56, where you write about the timeline that you create. And you write, I start a timeline plotting dates in my family alongside Doc Martin's claims, studies, dioxin details, and environmental regulations passed. Soon, however, the information is more than I can govern in a simple path, so I make 4 timelines racing in parallel tracks, but they run aground out of the gate. I try making note cards. I consider using a scatter plot. I stick push pins, memos to my office walls. I 3-hole punch my way into a mismanaged, I mean, I won't read the whole thing, but like, I loved that because you feel the writer writing and the writer figuring it out. And this was such an odyssey for you.
It's funny, I saw that in your book too, in Inheritance, and I made a note of that. I was like, we both were, something was unfolding gradually. I mean, it seems like in Inheritance, it seemed like there was an impetus, but there wasn't. It was like, you found out this one piece of information, then you had this, and you did the spit test. And the same with me, it was like, I'd find out one piece of information. It was really unfolding gradually, like this sort of detective story about identity, both of us really, and sort of genealogy. And, you know, we were like, I was like a detective. And it's funny you say that too, because I didn't even realize I was doing that until like a few weeks ago, that this was a book about writing the book in a way. It was very meta in that way. But I couldn't not say it, because I think part of the book itself is about the frustration about not finding the correct information and not linking disease to industry, you know. And so to try to find a pathway for that, this kind of is saying that, it's mapping that, it's saying this is a really hard task. How do we do it? As like a writer, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a epidemiologist, I'm barely a journalist, you know. So that's why I think I was doing that. I was just wanted to show the frustration of it and show how maniacal it was. I think I do it quite a few times in the book.
I loved it every time there was one of those passages, because you're mapping something. You're a detective, but the ground is shifting beneath you the whole entire time. Both the ground in terms of what you know and what you learn,
right?
And some of it is incredible. A lot of it is incredibly personal,
right.
And also your own ground, which is where you're coming at the story from. You are at first coming at the story from, you know, your husband is, you know, travels a great deal, and you're moving around the world with him and living in all of these different places, which is also a part of the story in a way.
Yeah,
because where is home?
Right.
And then for a long time, home is Mexico, Maine. You know, like it. And even though you haven't lived there in forever, and there's a really wonderful moment where, I'm going to find it. It's on page 32, and one of the people that you're speaking with in the book, who has stayed there, says to you, "It took courage for you to leave Mexico," and you say, "Not really. I almost didn't leave," and it goes on. I mean, but like most of us take the easy way out. We take the least stressful path, move away, avert our eyes, live upwind or upstream, and why wouldn't we? And I was just thinking about, you know, I mean, often people say to writers, that was so courageous of you, or that was so brave of you. And I feel uncomfortable every time someone says that. It even happened to me just within the last week, where I said, like, it's not brave to do what you have to do.
Right.
You know,
yeah.
The salmon kept swimming because they were salmon, you know, right. and they like some of the most intrepid salmon just kept on doing it, or stubborn, or, you know, stupid, whatever.
They know what was going to happen, but
they know what's going to happen, but they're salmon, so that's what they do.
Right.
And if you are a writer, that is what you do. And if you are a certain kind of writer, and this is your story, and this is your geography, and this is your background, then what you do is dig.
Yeah. And to talk about that, you were saying it, yeah, when I was traveling around with my husband and trying to figure out what that home was, that was also, I think that also really enunciated that, that going away and leaving the sort of, distance and proximity, you know, to look at a place and to look at my own self or a place or anything, you know, when you're close to something, it's really hard to see. It's like, you know, if you're that close, it looks very different from than if you're in Sweden, where we were living for 2 years, or, you know, so that too was part of it, you know, that scurrying through that information, but also like moving back and forth within the information. I'm here in Sweden looking at information, but then when I go to Maine and look at it, it looks very different. Or I talk to people in Maine, or talking on the phone. It's all that distance and proximity thing, that that tension that never relieves itself possibly in the book, but how does it? I mean, I think anybody who returns to home, you know, or is looking for, seeking parts of their identity, you know, it's a tricky subject that maybe has no end, right?
It probably doesn't. I mean, I was struck by, and this is not a spoiler alert for anyone who's here, there really aren't spoilers in this book. It's not
Right.
the kind of book. I mean, it's riveting, and it doesn't matter that you know certain details of what happened, but there's a moment after your father dies, which is a huge, I mean, impetus. I mean, you were already working on this and thinking about this for
Thinking
years.
about cancer and people dying, yes.
But then it was like right at your doorstep, and you then later, and there's this really beautiful passage really right after your father dies, where you go to an estate sale. It's one of my favorite passages in the whole book, because there's just this sense of, what does it mean, these, you know, people's things and the remnants of their lives, and what remains, exactly. But later, a bit later, you see your father's death certificate, and it's a false document. And I found myself really relating to that, because when I actually understood that my birth certificate was a false document, it was like, these are the things that are actually supposed to bookend our lives, that are supposed, you can count on them.
Right. Talk about ground shifting under your feet. Yeah,
exactly. And I thought, and you looked at it and you traced it all the way back to, this was essentially like not even a metaphor. I mean, a very real document, but a cover up. For so much.
It was a metaphor for the whole, well, maybe it was a cover up. I mean, in my opinion, probably, I can't say for a fact, but I also think that the book starts with a false document too. You know, I think about that. So his father is when I can relate to your book in this way too, is I looked at his obituary, and it said he was born in this one town in Prince Edward Island. And so that's really what started this book, was like, oh, I wonder where that town is. And I was like, I can't find it on any map. Why is it not on any map? And I start doing genealogy research, and then I go to Prince Edward Island, because I'm thorough, if anything. So I go to Prince Edward Island, and finally we find out from like some woman we met on the internet, it's like, oh, they spelled it wrong in the obituary and on his death certificate. And I'm like, what? You know, if that can be wrong, what else can be wrong? So I think I learned to be suspicious about all the documents I even looked at in this book, for this book, in some ways. Like, that's why I wanted to go and talk to people, like humans, and make them part of the evidence that I was collecting, you know?
So I imagine that the evidence and the story go on and on, you know, that they ultimately, for you, or maybe this is how I think of it for me, you will never have the complete picture. No matter how passionate, no matter how dogged, which is a really interesting idea and something to think about during our time right now, where we're all contending with profound uncertainty, or the things that we thought were tent poles aren't tent poles, or there are no tent poles, there are no plans. Just like what it is to write. How did you reach a point where you could say to yourself, you know what, I have been working on this book since 2009,
Nine, technically.
and it's now 11 years later, and at some points, I forget who it was who said, you know, no book is ever finished, just abandoned. You know, like at a certain point, or maybe novels can be finished, but I think nonfiction actually just has to be abandoned at a certain point. Like, I've gone as far as I can in this arc. What told you that you had reached that point?
Well, there's something John McPhee said too. He's like, you're done when you meet yourself coming the other way. You know?
Yeah.
And I think, well, for one thing, I should say, if they're on this call at all, but my editor's like, this book is due. That's one thing. But at the same time, but not really. I mean, if I, you know, we stretched the time a bit, but I met myself coming the other way, and that literally the day before this book was due to my kind of finalish draft, in November of 2019, I got 80 pounds of documents or something that showed up at a Texas residency I was doing. I was like, oh no, you know, I have to look at these, because it was from the character in my last chapter. And I looked through them and I was like, oh God, this all looks so familiar, and I'm shoving stuff. But what it did was, there was one piece of him, there's like one piece of paper in there, and I thought, oh, I forgot to call this guy back. And so I called him that day, and he called me back, this Stephen Lester that comes up in the very last chapter. And I called him, and it was the one piece of something that I could like put a pin on, you know, that he gave me. And so I felt like after that, I felt okay to like let it be. You know, I felt I found something, you know.
Yeah.
It's really the only thing that, and even that thing that I found, without giving the ending away, is not public information. So it's on a shelf somewhere in the Environmental Protection Agency.
Yeah.
So it's kind of unfound in a way too. So yeah, and what did you say? You said something about, oh, the uncertainty you were talking about. You know, I bumped into somebody at the post office the other day, and I said, oh, it's just such a drag. We're living so uncertain times. She's like, we've never been certain about anything. And I was like, well, I thought about that for days, and it's true, we haven't been uncertain, but I feel like with now and in this book, what was uncertain was like the idea of what the truth was, even like what even words meant, or what, you know, again, the ground shifting under your feet. Like, you know, we look at the news now and we're not even sure what the truth is. So that feels different now than it did before, to say, oh, we don't know what the future is. But now we like don't even know what the truth, we don't even know what like words mean sometimes.
Yeah, they're interesting times.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I wanted to ask you about the decision to include photographs in the book, and also you made this great trailer with many of the photographs that are in the book, and I'm assuming, other than the historical photos, that you took those pictures, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, that's just, I would just love for you to talk a little bit about that, because it feels like photography has also become integral somehow to your creative process.
Yes.
Yeah.
I took about 30,000 pictures actually. Because I have a terrible memory, and but photography helps me, and I think I even wrote about it in the book. I'm sure I did. Photography helps me remember things, and it's the way I see things happening. I've been a photographer for a long time, and it's the way I frame things. And in this story, again, like you were saying, you have all these different Kerris, and part of that is like framing the different Kerris. That was part of it. I also think that the photography enunciates that sort of insider outsider thing that I had going on. I was like of this town, but I didn't live in this town. And so photography, you're a witness, but you're also a participant, you know. And just like I was in this town, I actually participate in some activism in this town. I'm not an objective journalist. And I think it also does, I was also a critic of this town for a long time, but also an advocate. So, and photography also does that, I think. But it's also just on a simpler level, just like, a lot of people don't know about these places. And yes, you can read my writing, but I also just wanted to put quotidian photographs in the book with no titles and just let them kind of linger along the text and just, just like a little surprise. Be like, if you buy a secondhand book at a store and something falls out, that's kind of how I was a little bit looking at it too,
Yeah, it's very satisfying because it's not a kind of biographical, like here's an image and here's an explanation of the image. It's just, here are these images.
Yeah, they're not even related and necessarily to the text that's going on.
Yeah.
And I tried actually not to, just so people can have another view. So there's like the inside outside, and then there's this whole other view that plays with that too. But yeah, photography helps me remember. I think a lot of us, obviously.
Yeah. But again, in the photographs, they aren't photographs to support the idea that this book is a memoir or that this book is a book of investigative journalism. They are also unclassifiable, which is really what the book is, unless it's what was the term?
Autoethnographic memoir.
Ethnographic memoir. Yes.
Investigation. Yeah, whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, it's funny. I just have to say that my lovely, lovely St. Martin's Press, they were like, you can have 15 photos, and I sent them 30, and they put them all in. So
yeah, that's a writer's dream. So I want to, before we open it up to questions, there's something that I think intersects in both of our books that has to do with secrets, and there is. There's a moment where you write that you no longer have to keep, after your father dies, you no longer have to keep secrets from him, for him, or from him or for him. And I was really struck by that. And I was also struck by something earlier in the book where you write that people are constantly saying to you, and my God, people have constantly said this to me, what's the use of digging up the past? Sorry, that's my dog. That's Samson. He has to say hello. And it reminds me of something that I remember giving a reading from Inheritance, not a reading, a talk at a country club in New Jersey right after the book came out. And it was the kind of thing where people turned in their questions on index cards, so they didn't actually have to ask them. And I got them all and I shuffled through them. And one of the first ones that I really just wanted to answer was someone said, what good is knowing?
That's great.
So but these are in a dance with each other. What's the use of digging up the past? What good is knowing? These people should know each other, the people who ask that question.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm like, the past foretells everything about our future in every sense of the, just think about it in terms of the landscape. Here's an interesting thing. So the Maine Sunday Telegram did a profile of me in August, and they interviewed a few people around, and they went to my hometown and they asked the economic developer what he thought of my book, even though it hadn't been published yet, and he certainly hadn't read it. He said, well, Kerri's book is about the past. And I was like, no, I mean, the past in this town specifically, there are toxics buried under the land. That is the past that affects the current moment and the current rate of disease and the current amount of dioxins in your breast milk. And there's nothing about the past that is nostalgic or great about that, And I'm just shocked that people don't see that. You can't, I mean, there's so many sayings about it. It's like learning from your past or whatever, but like, this past is actually center stage in the present day lives of these people. This mill is still sitting there. It's still chugging out pollution, it's still employing people, it's still the orbit around which everybody spins. So there's nothing about my book that is in the past. Not to mention I started writing it in 2009, which technically I guess is the past, but I mean, not really. It's not, I do go back in the far past, again, recursive movements, but in order to see how that past, again, like to examine my Akkadian history or to examine, you know, that kind of thing. How did that even connect with me and my identity? You know, so everything's connected. In fact, the chapters, like chapter 16 talks to chapter 1 and chapter 15 talks to chapter 2. So I specifically structured it that way so that, and then in the middle is where my father dies. So that's like, you know, it's everything. The past is everything.
Yeah, and what you're speaking to also really has to do with the way that we think of. I mean, there's a lot that's very personal in this book, and there's a way that we so often think of what's personal or what's divulged as being somehow, you know, raw or, you know, I think it's so important to note how crafted this is. You know, nothing, everything is by design, everything.
Right, it's not like in the,
no, it's not, it's not scattershot memory. It's that river, and really I mean, so much of the act of writing any kind of really powerful nonfiction is imposing a structure on it. Finding the structure, which
finding, the material shows you the structure.
Right, and so for like, I'm sure there are writers who are listening in tonight. I'm wagering that you did not begin this process with, I know it's going to be like the river.
No, and it sounds,
yeah.
No, yeah, that sounds, it sounds like I did, but I did not. I mean, I would have, that would have been great because the book would have been done years ago. But no, I feel like the material always tells you what the structure is going to be.
It tells you, and sometimes it tells you years into it.
Yeah, and you can see me going through the material in this book. So I think people will see why it became like that kind of river. It was like a river. It was just
exactly
accumulating like debris. Like if you picture a river too, like, and it picks up flotsam and jetsam and things, like I say in the beginning in the prologue, it's picking up all that stuff so that at the end of the river where it dumps out into the Atlantic Ocean, in our case, that's where the river dumps, then all that accumulation is going to dump out, and including dioxins.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm looking to see time-wise. I think we're like at question time. Do we have questions yet?
Yeah, you should have them in your chat.
I don't think I do. I don't. I just have like events links and.
Oh, it should be further down.
Further down.
Let's see, that's all.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Okay, can people see me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So Kerri, we're going to move into some questions.
Oh, great.
And okay, a first question is, what company or companies owned the mill? Can you talk more about them?
Yes. So I love talking about this because our paper mill started in, let's see, this is the first picture of it in 1901. It was Oxford Paper Company. It was the founder of it was Hugh Chisholm, and he's actually was the founder of International Paper, which is the largest paper manufacturer in the world. He gave it to his son, and then he gave it to his son. This is all in the book too. And then it was sold to a chemical company out of Richmond, Virginia. And then it was, I get a little fuzzy on details. Like I said, my memory's bad, but went to a corporation and then to a conglomerate, and now it's owned by a Chinese company. So it basically is the arc of manufacturing in America, you know, to go from a one-man operation to like, you know, foreign ownership. So it's been several owners. I mean, specifically, it's been like Boise, Cascade, Mead Paper Company, New Page. It's been Ethel, Oxford Paper Company. Maybe like 7 or 8 owners since 1901.
And another question is, have you gotten any pushback from your hometown folks for writing the book?
0 so far, except for that economic developer who said my book was about the past. But I can't tell you how supportive people have been. It's almost like everybody I think in town that has ever lived there and lives there now has been reading the book this weekend. I can almost feel their energy, and they've been like emailing me, I'm on chapter 4 and this and this, and it's been really lovely. Like, I love it, you know, Facebooking me and putting it everywhere. And, you know, my mother's running around Maine, making sure all the bookstores have it. And it's been really supportive. But one of the biggest comments I keep getting, or one of the most consistent comments I keep getting is, I'm so glad that somebody finally wrote this book. So I feel good about that. Like, I feel like I'm carrying them with me. Like, we're all in this together, you know?
Well, it's interesting too and moving, because when you started researching and reporting, not everybody was psyched or trusting. And especially like Maine is one of those parts of the country where you really have to earn people's trust. I mean, there are a few states that come to mind where that's the case. And Maine is like really like that would like flash as one of them. And to feel like you did earn their trust, and that people are responding in the way that they are, must be really.
Yeah, it feels really incredible. And yeah, I mean, being from there, I think this is one of those books too. I haven't seen a book like this, really, a narrative nonfiction book where it's about the working class that's written from within the working class, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a big part of the trust. Like, I understand, you know, I consider myself part of the working class. People don't want to hear that when they look at my Instagram feed or whatever, and they see my pretty house. But I mean, this is where I'm from, you know, this is the landscape of my life. So yeah, it's been really, I was nervous, of course. I still am. I'm sure there's going to be some criticism, but I feel more support than anything.
You wrote an essay that was published on LitHub last week. I'm not going to remember the number of jobs.
Oh, that was New York Review Books, yeah.
Oh, New York Review Books. And what was the title? My how many?
86 jobs.
86 jobs. Yeah, that was a wonderful piece. And makes the point.
Yeah,
really
and my 87th job this week.
So one question that one of the listeners has is whether Kerri Arsenault had certain models in mind as she wrote this elegy/memoir/journalistic account, parentheses, autoethnography.
I used a bunch of different books, but none of them had them all together. But you know what I mean? So like I just published a piece in LitHub last week about 5 books that helped me change my ideas about storytelling. And those 5 books, I can just say very briefly, one was Bonnie Jo Campbell's American Salvage, where she takes like ordinary people in industrial lives and like brings them to life without making them sort of poverty porn, you know, or any of that. She just very like, she also has a really incredible sound landscape in that book. Another was John Freeman's Dictionary of the Undoing, where he builds this book from letters, and it's like this accumulation of the way he accumulates the meanings of words. He starts with it's A to Z, cultural criticism. So that there was, Rob Nixon's, I'm looking around because all the books are up here, Rob Nixon's Environmentalism of the Poor, where he talks about how to write stories. It's really like how to write stories, or he's examining how to write stories that are toxic disasters, but see how toxic disasters are more slow. They're not like Chernobyl's, or they're not like, you know, a hurricane or something. It happens slowly and attritionally, and like how to write stories like that so that they feel urgent, like climate change. It's tricky to write a story about these things that aren't, you know, newsy, you know? So that was another book. And The Jungle, Upton Sinclair, of course. It was the first book that ever meant anything to me in high school, and I still have the old copy here somewhere. It's like beat up. Yeah, I think in Silent Spring, obviously, you know, as I have all the original reviews from Silent Spring when she wrote it into my bulletin board.
Mm-hmm. So another question is, how did you break away from spending your life in that one town?
Somebody said to me, you make your own luck. And because people say you're lucky, I'm like, no, I'm not lucky. I did this. But a little bit of luck making, you know, it was very close. I was engaged before I went to college. It was very close. And I met somebody in the post office who said, aren't you going to this other college, which was in Wisconsin? And I said, no, I'm going to go to the Maine college here. And she was like, you really should go to this other college. And I just walked home from the post office and I was like, she's right. I mean, this is a deeper conversation than that. And I got on the phone and it was like August before my first year of college. And, you know, I went to that college, and I think that was part of it. And part of it was like going to New York City for the first time in the 80s and seeing something that I had never seen before and saying, I want to see more, you know.
Isn't that amazing the way, I mean, that person in the post office may not know that she changed your life. He or she changed your life.
Yeah. She's going to know because I'm doing I'm doing something in her town. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just want to point out that happens all the time. We say things or do things or take small actions that we never know, whose lives are completely and utterly impacted, and then have ripple effects throughout time. Like you left, you did everything that you did, you've written this book now, and that will have ripple effects, you know, beyond anything that you ever know.
Right. And it was definitely that. If I would have stayed in Maine, I probably would have gotten married, and, you know, who knows? Not that well, it would have changed my life. Yeah.
So I wanted to make sure that we leave time we had a really interesting moment right before we began tonight where Patty from RJ Julia was asking us about what we've been reading and if there's anything we can recommend. And we completely independently wanted to say the same book. And you went up to your desk to go find it. I was talking about it. Like we had not planned this. And so you know, bringing out books right now is in this moment that we're in, is very hard. It's very hard to find readers and for readers to know about books. And this is a first novel by a writer named Meredith Hall, who wrote a book prior. It's called Beneficence. That's not the actual book jacket, but it's as good as we can do right now.
As good as we can.
And Meredith had written a memoir published about 18 years ago that I taught and loved and championed. And she then closed her door again, and she's been working on this book for a really long time, and you can feel it.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm going to actually compare it to Wallace Stegner, which is one of the biggest compliments that I could ever give a novel. It is so deeply felt, and the characters, you know, it's a cliche in a blurb to say that it stays with you long after you turn the last page.
Oh, yeah,
but it really does. And the book comes out, I think, next week, except not really because of these crises in publishing. Kerri and I are each going to be in conversation with her. I'm going to be in conversation with her at Tattered Cover, and you're going to be in conversation with her
at Engine in Biddeford. It's this nonprofit. It's Biddeford, Maine.
So if anybody can bring themselves after they buy Milltown to also pre-order beneficence. It's
I have to say, this book, I read the first chapter, and I emailed the editor and I said, "This is a masterpiece," is what I said. Like, and this was months ago, and I pitched this book to review, and nobody bit, but I just like, I have to get this book out there.
Yeah.
It's not just it's the story, but the writing is so special. I can't even understand it. It's so beautiful without being showy. I don't know. It's unbelievable. Yeah. And it takes place in Maine, by the way, I should say. So
that is true. I really think it's a modern masterpiece, and I feel very dedicated to making sure that people know about it, and you do too. And and now I'm so glad we get to do that.
Yeah.
But before I guess we have a couple more minutes. Let me just see if there's more. Let's see. I'm curious about this question. Will you write fiction? Can you talk about your next project?
I might. I'm pretty exhausted by this one, but not that fiction's not exhausting. That's not what I meant. I just don't know if I can. I don't know. I can say this. I'm 100%. This is my full-time job right now. This book. I said that when I wrote it, and I'm just going to do everything. I'm going to classes. They're adapting some things, and I have 30 events or 35 events, and they just keep coming at me. So I'm really just focusing on this, but I am writing a lot of essays right now that have peeled off from this book. So that's one thing I'm doing. But a novel, I am considering this. I want to write a biography. I've as a book critic, I've read so many biographies, and they're always about famous people, and they're not necessarily interesting people. They're just famous people. So I thought, why not write something about somebody that's not famous and ordinary, but look at their ordinariness in a different way. But I want to do it in fiction form. So I want to write a biography, a fictional biography of an ordinary person. Does that sound crazy? Probably. That's like no editor wants to buy. It's just like this book I wrote. They're like, what is that genre? I don't know, but that's
like ethnographic memoir, except that people discover things as they discover them. And I think we're in a really interesting moment for what is unclassifiable. Why call it a thing that needs to go? I mean, I understand from a bookseller's point of view or from a marketing point of view, where does it go? But
I have to say though, this ungenre thing that's happened in my book, it's been great because it's being put in many genres, which I'm happy about. It's like biography or memoir or investigative, But the only thing it isn't, and I do want to say this, it's not an expose. So there was one critic that expected that and didn't get it and was unhappy and unsatisfied, but it's not an expose. And I basically say that in the first, I think you all heard me read. It doesn't sound like an expose. So I'm happy with it being genreless.
Yeah, well, it can't be an expose because...
How would you do that?
Because
myself,
also, the story is ongoing, so it's not like gotcha.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of that too. Is it okay? Maybe I could have written an expose if I had access to scads and scads of money where I could pay researchers, or I had the scaffolding of academia, or it wasn't the book I set out to write, but somebody else can write it. You're welcome, anybody, if you want to write an expose about this town. It's not what I want to do, but.
Let's see. What's next, Kerri? Like what are those next, and this isn't a question that's here, it's a question from me. Like how do you envision this next period of time, like during this, COVID times when we're home and you and I could be sitting together on either of our porches and having this conversation, but we can't do that. And like, what is it like publishing a book into this moment?
Yeah, I mean, I was very, very sad. I'm 53 years old and here's my first book, and I couldn't wait to get out there. And I'm a very social person, as you know. I like to cook giant meals for people. I wanted to feed everybody in my town. and I couldn't do that, and I was really mad. But now I just, like we've talked about, I'm embracing it. And I think it's a really great way to connect with people I would never otherwise connect with. You know, I was going to hit the road in my car and drive around New England, but here I can just sit here and do it every single night. I mean, that's part of it. And the other part is I'm really, you know, with winter coming, we're building a fire pit so that we can sit outside. But I'm also going to really throw myself into some other work that I'm thinking about. Namely, too, applying for a PhD program. There's some really, I know it sounds crazy, but I know that and my biography of an ordinary woman. There's a project I won a grant for with somebody else. It's from the Architectural League of New York City, and we're doing this project, and there's 10 cities and 10 projects, and the city we're focusing on is the city in my book, the town in my book, and we have to cover things like environment, health, architecture, infrastructure, and that kind of thing. And I've come upon a part of that project that I'm really interested in. It's about, I think I said it a little bit, but it's about memorials and how we memorialize sort of resource extraction, but we don't memorialize the consequences of that work. And I'm really looking hard at that, especially in my hometown, where we like have a huge statue of Paul Bunyan. And then Ed Muskie, who penned the Clean Water Act, who is from my town, there's like a little granite, it looks like a gravestone. So he looks like, it's not his gravestone, but it's like, he's got this little gravestone and then this Paul Bunyan. You know, it's like, it doesn't make sense. When in fact, Ed Muskie was an actual giant who was like 6'4" or something. So just looking at those kind of things is something I really want to look at this winter. Sounds like a winter project, doesn't it?
It does sound like a winter project.
With my wine.
I think maybe the last question would be, and like leads us into that, is did the photographs help you to tell the story?
I think they do. Like for some of the reasons I said, but also when sometimes words fail. Let's admit it, they do. Sometimes they fail, and I think some of these just evoke emotion without saying anything, or they evoke something. I think you'll see. I should put them all on my website. I don't have them all. I will, though. Trust me, in the next few days, I will put them all on my website. But they do. I think photography, visual art is different than written art. It evokes different emotions. It touches different synapses, I think. So it tells that story in a different way. Sure. And the more ways I can tell this story, obviously, I can. Investigative memoir, ethno, auto, whatever. Photography.
All right, I think this is a perfect time to say goodbye to our viewers and also to thank Kerri and Dani. An amazing event. Please remember to purchase the book. There'll be lots of signed copies at RJ's, so come on in or send us a note or a text. We'll respond in any way you contact us. And of course, Inheritance. I think we always have a lot of backlists of Dani Shapiro at RJ's. So
we talked over this book very, very early in its progress, I think, Dani, right? Remember?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
So it meant a lot to me too. I should say this book had something to do with my book too, about the secrets we talked about.
Well, thank you both. Good luck, Kerri, on your journey.
Thank you.
Wonderful book. Please, everybody read it. It's riveting. It's just terrific. So thanks for coming to RJ's.
Great to be with you.
Okay, bye-bye.
So much.